I'm going to go to China because
Let's go to China.
Yeah, let's go to China. So, or let's go. Yeah, Taiwan. Taiwan is part of China.
Yes, it is.
And yeah, it took me a moment. I was like, wait a minute, Taiwan is part of China. So one of the things you pointed out, actually, was there anything that came to the forefront of your mind? You pointed out the recall votes that were taking place in Taiwan. Now, I saw this, and this is pretty amazing when you think about it. For one, the Taiwanese parliament is rather insane. They're putting on like football gear and pulling out bills and everything else and fighting in parliament. I've never seen anything like that's not true. The Turkish parliament was that way too. So was Japanese parliament.
Have you ever seen pig entrails thrown across the parliamentary floor?
I have not.
Happened. That has happened in Taiwan.
Oh, that is disgusting. Yeah. You're pointing out the recall votes. Go into that for me. So the recall votes is where they were pulling, I think it was DPP.
A year or so ago, there was an election in Taiwan. Now, what happened in Taiwan? There are basically three schools of thought in Taiwan. There's the independent school of thought, which is actually quite small. There's the reunion school of thought to the mainland, which is also quite small. And there's the status quo, which is quite large. So effectively, you have these two peripherals. A lot of people want to be independent of China. A lot of people want to be part of China. And a lot of people in the middle say, no, we're quite happy where we are. This is the status quo. And China itself, strangely enough, is quite happy to remain the status quo for the time being. China wants reunion. No question about that. But they're happy to go with the status quo at the moment. The moment anybody says, we are going to go independent, that's the time that China will say, no, you're not. So what happened in the election last year was the winner of the presidential seat is a independent American-minded person. Now, people call him a puppet. He's very strongly related to America. His vice president is actually an American citizen, I believe, but she's certainly educated. These people are educated in America by Americans, supported by Americans. They get all their donations through the National Endowment for Democracy and organizations like that. So they're very much American-leaning people. That's how they get into this position of power. So he got in because the status quo and the pro-reunion vote was split in half because a new party was created by the mayor of Taipei. The former mayor of Taipei decided to stand for presidency and created his own parliament, his own party, sorry. And what happened then, because those two people are both more pro-China than pro-America, it split the vote in two. He was a very popular person. So 60% of the vote went to the pro-status quo, pro-China, but 40% of the vote went to the pro-America, and that's the person who won the presidency. So there we now have this guy, William Lai. He is the president of this. In China, they call him the leader. They don't call him the president, because how can you be the president of a province? But nominally, he's the president of the province of Taiwan. Now, he is pro-America. And the parliament, which is called the Legislative Yuan, that he presides over, is actually much more in favor of the status quo and the pro-reunion parties. Mm-hmm. So we've got a parliament that he didn't like. So democratically elected representatives, he decided there is this thing that's a very peculiar Taiwanese thing called a recall. If he thought that there was a problem with the vote when they got in, he could have a recall vote. So here we are almost a year later with a recall on the vote. And I think it was 25 parliamentarians had to re-stand for their own seat. Every single one of them was a more pro-China than pro-American person. Now, they weren't all pro-reunion. There were some pro-status quo, but they were not pro-America. And 25 of them, if he'd won 5 or 6, he would have gained control of the House. But he won a big fat 0.
Really?
Every single one of them was re-elected back in the position and is now confirmed. So now they're saying, well, this wasn't about party politics. This was about something else. So there we have a double whammy for the pro-American camp in Taiwan, They have lost. They lost the original election. They did get the president in place, but only with 40% of the vote. 60% of the vote was for the other two, and it got split. That was the problem that they had. And I don't know if I can confirm this, but I'm fairly sure that there would have been American funding for the new party because it would have split that vote very nicely. It would have suited the Americans to split that vote. So if you can imagine that you don't have things like primaries, you just had a split in the vote. And so 60% of the people who wanted to remain closer to China voted for their preferred candidate, but the guy who got 40% of the vote won because he got the highest number. They got 27 and 33%, and this guy got 40%. So that's how we ended up with a pro-American president in Taiwan. And now he has failed in his bid to remove the candidates that he didn't like.
So the population effectively said, "We don't like what you're doing. This is a
the
no."
population, a lot of the people, there are very few similarities between what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening in Taiwan. Very few. But a lot of people are making comparisons, and it's a fair comparison because what they're seeing now is America giving them a great deal of support until it no longer suits them to support it, and then they'll back off. America has done this to Ukraine. It's now saying to Ukraine, "You're Europe's problem, you're not our problem." And that is one of the reasons why Europe has to buy more equipment from the military in America, because they don't have enough. They've got to buy it from America. America currently doesn't have enough either. That's another story. We could go into what they depleted in the 12-day war with Iran, if they want to call it that. The 12-day conflict. But that's a different story. America now is backing away from Ukraine. Zelensky is dead in the water. He's a dead man walking at the moment in terms of his political career because he has closed down the anti-corruption, the American-founded anti-corruption organization. Yes. And the moment he closed that down, all of America's press turned on him because all of his parliament, they've got massive houses and they've got lots of money. They've got Rolls Royces and they've got all the things that they want. His wife goes shopping in Paris. All this kind of thing is going on. And I think we might see the end of Zelensky fairly soon because he can't survive this. I'm sure he can't survive this. But what Taiwan is doing is looking at this and saying, well, hang on, if America's not going to support its closest ally and it's, we are with you to the end. That was the claim. It came from a president, and the next president comes in and said, yeah, but he was an idiot. So one president says my predecessor who made that decision was an idiot, so I'm not going to go with that. And he actually said this. It was a stupid president. So that's what Taiwanese are looking at right now, I think. They're looking at this and saying, well, hang on, even NVIDIA, which is a massive company, and then TSMC, all of these things are coming in through Taiwan, the microchips. Jensen Huang of NVIDIA and the people who run TSMC, they're all saying the same thing. We have to deal with China. We have no choice but deal with China. Otherwise, our market is dead. And China will come back, and they already have come back, with a better quality chip than we can provide them. China is now going to leapfrog the technology that they had and were selling to China, and China was happily buying and paying for. But as soon as they put restrictions on this, China said, well, if we've got restrictions on what we can buy, we better make our own. Now, everyone said they can never do that. They're doing it. They've done it.
I don't know why they would say that. No, you're so right. And I used to wonder, some of my guests I would ask, does Taiwan see what is happening to Ukraine? And why do they think that wouldn't happen to Taiwan? Like, meaning China has been they're very slow to move. They're very slow to act. They're buying, we need time. If we have time, we're going to build better ships. We're going to make better products, etc. And at some point, America is going to say, this is not worth us losing.
They would lose. For sure, they would lose. But they don't really care too much about losing proxies. So they would very much like the Philippines to be involved in this. They would very much like Japan and Korea to be involved in this, and Australia too. I mean, I'm an Australian and I hate seeing this. I hate saying this, but Australia are being absolutely mad. They're allowing Americans to use Australia as a forward base for the Pacific region. Yes. But China has said quite categorically, it will never invade Taiwan. You can't invade. It's a civil war. You can't invade your own country. But what it will do is defend Taiwan from being taken away. So that's what China has said it will do. It will defend Taiwan. It has never ruled out military force, but it's never actually ruled it in either. So you can't say all these experts, oh, China doesn't rule out military force. That's true. But have you asked them, and what did they say? They have always said, we will defend Taiwan. And that's what they plan to do. They have plans to do it. And every single war game scenario that America has done has had America losing. They can't win. So they're not going to go to war. It's as simple as that. So they will wait. And we just had an announcement from the UK, the defense secretary, or defense minister, and the foreign secretary are in Australia, or were in Australia yesterday or the day before, making an announcement that Australia and the UK will fight together if Taiwan needs them.
That's amazing.
Is a very well. Australia didn't say this. The UK said this, but they were in Australia when they said it. That is an indication that they no longer recognize the one China policy.
Yes.
And that is a very serious position to be in. That's a red line for China. That's a very big red line for China. If you're saying you're going to come to war against China, why are China going to sell you anything?
No, that's a good point. But it seems like they were salami slicing that. It seemed like they didn't believe the one China policy for a while. They would get lip service, but it didn't seem like they believe it.
For a long time, it's been what they call strategic ambiguity. It's not really lip service. They have always said, the Americans and the British and the Australian Prime Minister is very ambiguous on this. He basically says, we want the status quo. We're happy we recognize the one China policy. Beijing is the capital of China. We know that. He's doing all of that. And he was here just a week or so ago as well. And I felt he was here for 6 days. And it was both cultural, trade, and diplomatic visits. But he didn't bring his foreign secretary and he didn't bring his defense minister, because those two are the anti-China hawks. So he's got some very serious anti-China on his front bench, and he's got a very hostile media. So it's going to take a couple of years, but he's just been re-elected just in May this year. They only have 3-year terms. But he's just been re-elected, and I think he'll probably come through with a bit more confidence. His first 3 years, he just sat on the fence. Now he's actually he met with, in the second term, he met with Xi Jinping before he met with Trump, and that's a telling thing. He did try and meet Trump, but Trump let him down, and that's another telling thing. Why didn't Trump meet with him? They had the opportunity, but he had to go and do something else.
I'm curious. Do you think Australia would go to war in this way? I know war is. But do you think they would? The
problem with Australia, if you want a yes or no answer to that,
yes, I'm going to pin you down.
My answer is no. The only reason Australia would go to war is if there's a war to go to, and China isn't going to war. So the answer is no. However, what you need to understand about America is that it is 100% infiltrated by American interests. The defense, the logistics, the retail, the agriculture, the finance, everything is completely controlled by American corporate interests or American military interests. And many of their government departments many of their government leaders are trained in America. They've been to America and had American indoctrinations, brainwashing, we can call it. But these are people. Australia is very much under the control. And I don't think most Australians realize this. There's a man called Clinton Fernandez. He's an academic who wrote a paper on this quite recently. And in that paper, it's something like 60% of Australia's economy is controlled by American corporate interests.
Really?
And it was, the banks are owned by there's 4 big banks. There's 4 major banks in Australia. They're all controlled by BlackRock. They're all of them, all 4 of them. So if you walk into a bank, you're walking into a building that is asset managed by this. Your staff teller is managed by a human resource company that is an American corporation. The money that you send from one place to another is sent through the SWIFT system, which goes in. Why does it take 3 days to send a few dollars from me to my daughter in Australia? It takes 3 days. Why? Who's got that money for 3 days? This is electronic transactions. It shouldn't take 3 days. China's system takes 3 seconds. Bang, your money's gone and it's there. It's arrived. So China has a CIPS system, which is taking over from the SWIFT system for some transactions. And it's instant and it costs next to nothing. Why does it cost me money to put my money into American control for several days while they use it on the short-term money market and then give it to my daughter who's been waiting for it since, I send it on Monday and she gets it on Thursday. Why does that happen? Because America's got control over this. So the SWIFT system is not American, but the system that underlies it does. If you go we're on an American system now. You go onto Microsoft, you go onto Apple iOS systems. Everything is controlled by America, and Australia is the same. It's even worse in Australia. The logistics, transportation, the public utilities, the retail outlets, the agriculture, much of it is controlled by American interests. And we've got these organizations like the Lowy Institute and the ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which are getting funded by America to denigrate China and say China's a great big threat to you. I actually have Australian friends who believe that China is preparing, after it has taken over Taiwan, to roll over and take over Australia. I said, have you any idea? Taiwan's 137 kilometers away from the coast of China. Actually, parts of it are only 2 kilometers away, but Taiwan Island, the main island, is 137 kilometers away. Sydney's another 10,000 kilometers. How are they going to get there with enough manpower? It's a stupid thing to think about. But everybody, not everybody, a lot of people in Australia believe this is true. It's crazy. And they believe it because it's been in their papers for years, for at least 10 years. Almost every newspaper, almost every day, you pick it up and there's a threat from China.
So it's not so much that the average regular Australian would be gung-ho for this. It's more so that the corporate space, political space may be on board.
I haven't been to Australia for 6 years. Last time I was there was 2019. It was before COVID. And I was in a bar in Australia, in Brisbane, and I was talking to a guy, and I said I lived in China. He said, "Oh, what do you think about that then, mate?" And I said, "Well, it's quite good. It's a nice place to live." Hey. And that was the answer. You're not going to tell me China's a good place. This is an ordinary guy in a bar, and wow. If I go shopping, I got to the point where I self-censored. I just, I've been living overseas for a while, left it at that. I didn't tell people I was in China. My daughter doesn't tell anybody that she works with. I hope they're not watching this. And she looks like me. My daughter doesn't tell anyone that she works with that her dad lives in China.
Really?
She self-censors on that. She said it just causes arguments.
But
because
70%,
people do believe this.
But it's something like 70% of the Australian economy is coming out of China or trade.
Yeah.
How does that work? How does that work?
If I could answer that, I would be the genius that you think I am. I don't know.
That's disheartening. That's very disheartening.
It is.
That
it really is.
Disheartening.
And it's purely because of misinformation. Even the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, has been infiltrated. People get fired because Rupert Murdoch wants them fired. Rupert Murdoch is an Australian-born American citizen who owns Fox News. And I mean, he supports Trump and his son supports whoever the other one is. So they've got feet in both camps. Lachlan Murdoch and Rupert Murdoch will have different political... They're not political at all. They are purely and simply self-serving. They're serving their own interests. So they own... this is another problem in Australia. They own something like 60% of all media in Australia. An American family owns 60% of all media in Australia and has influence in all the other media as well, because everybody at some stage has worked for Murdoch Press. So that's you move up through the ranks, you get pulled off headhunted away by other stations or other media groups. That's how it works. And Rupert Murdoch lets them go to the ABC, take this senior position in the ABC, and we'll feed you things that need to be put on. We'll help you. We'll help your career. And that's how it works in media. Now, every journalist in Australia would deny that, but just pick up any newspaper in Australia and you'll find the same story. There is only one city in Australia that does not have every single newspaper And I'm talking about the little local newspapers, the free ones that you pick up in the stores, and the city newspapers are all owned by the Murdoch Corporation. News Corp.
Wow.
Mm.
That is a free
It's
press.
frightening. It's frightening.
That is a free press.
And, when that guy wants to create a problem for you, you have a problem, because it doesn't matter what you've done. Every single newspaper and half the TV stations are saying you've done this. Doesn't matter. And they don't say this person did this. They ask the question. They pose it as a question, and everybody thinks it's real. That's how media misinforms us. They pose questions. Is China going to attack Australia? Well, of course it's not. But then they've got a whole lot of expert opinions that say China has built the largest military force in the world over the last 20 years. No question about that. But where have they ever invaded? Nowhere. In the last 20 years, China has been nowhere except one international grouping in Djibouti, because there was an international requirement to have anti-piracy there. The Americans are there, the French are there, the Germans are there, the Swedes are there, the Chinese are there. So they have a military base in Djibouti. Despite all the stories that you see, there are no military bases in the South China Sea. They have built a couple of airstrips, and they've got some weather stations on there. Not one person can ever show me a photograph of a soldier, a sailor, an airman, and there was only one event where an aircraft that was a military aircraft landed on there, and that was to pick up two people who'd been injured in an industrial accident, pick them up, take them to the mainland for hospital care. That's the only time in history a military plane has landed. Now, then they say, but they could use it for military. Well, yeah, they could, but they haven't yet. They could use Gwadar Port in Pakistan for military. Yes, they could, but they haven't. They could use this port they're building in Guinea-Bissau in West Africa for military. They could, but they want it there for iron ore that's coming out. It's not a military base. It's an iron ore transshipping base. That's all it is. They could do something. China may very well use this for whatever purposes that they have on their agenda for today. So all these things that could be done is what are reported. And people don't notice the modals. The modals, they could, might, will, should, must. These are words that media use very, very cleverly. Modals. They could do something, but they haven't.
Every accusation is a confession. That is what I've come to the conclusion.
So far, that's also deemed to be true.
It's very true. Every accusation is a confession. When they put stuff up, the U.S. has 800, if not more, military bases around the world. It is astonishing to me that the U.S. is, oh God, China is militarizing this area. Dude, serious? Are you being serious right now? I'm curious on your take on something else. There is a lot of talk that has been coming out about 2027, where they would say Russia could invade NATO and China could take Taiwan. Yeah. And we're thinking this is 2027.
Yeah, they could.
That this is not China looking at 2027. This is Europe looking at 2027. The US looking at 2027.
Yeah, this is the US's timeline. It's got nothing at all to do with China. Nobody in China has said this, ever. Nobody in China has ever said they're going to take Taiwan, ever. Not one person, not even Xi Jinping, not even the defense secretary, not one media outlet in China has ever said, we're going to take Taiwan, ever. They've always said, we're looking forward to reunification with Taiwan. And in fact, Xi Jinping has said, we'll wait 1,000 years for it. But for some reason, they seem to think that Xi Jinping will retire or be, and that was another thing, he's going to be ousted in the next, in the last 2 days, I've received emails from people telling me that China is in chaos. Is it? I just traveled right there from China. I was 10 hours on a high-speed train just 3 days ago, and I saw no chaos anywhere.
If you remember, they said Putin had cancer. Putin was going to jump off.
Putin had cancer, well, Xi Jinping is going to be deposed. One person said in the next 10 days, and another person said within 8 weeks. So let's see if that happens. It could happen.
That's amazing.
It's not likely to happen. No, the idea of this 2027 is purely and simply speculation. And the reason they're speculating that is because they know for a fact that China's military defenses will be at their peak at 2027. They know that they have They have little chance, no chance of defeating China in China now. Now, here's the difference. People say to me, why doesn't China get involved in the Middle East? China is not an offensive force. It doesn't have the military capability to take an army to another area. It hasn't built the logistics support to do that. It's built an army that stays in China. Now, They do have one base in Djibouti, and they built a base, and they had to build a naval base and a military base next to it so that they could have the logistics support. But they don't have the capability of going off to do huge military expansion projects the way America can and has done in the past. They're simply built as a defensive force.
But Jerry, that's the U.S. plan, though. That the idea that China is built a defensive force to defend China, and so the U.S. with the ability to project nothing. That's what you should do as a country. But what the U.S. is looking at is we need to hobble China in some way. We know, and the reason why I was actually about 2027, not because it's a Chinese plan, but because it is something that the American, as I say, every accusation is a confession. Yeah. Is it that the U.S. and Europe is looking at 2027 at a time where they need to provoke some kind of activity using Taiwan or something else? And one last point for this before I let you answer it. The U.S. is looking at China's defensive posture as a weakness, with the belief that, well, we can damage their capability of moving products around the globe, then we can somehow damage China in and of itself. Meaning China is such a magnificent industrial power that part of their power is being able to send goods and items around the world. And if the U.S. can somehow hobble that, because we are let's say, a projection of power around the globe, then that can somehow damage China's ability to advance. That's the way they're looking at it. They're looking at it as if we can destroy their shipping, if we can somehow create war zones that China has to defend their shipping goods. I mean, give me your take on that. I mean, do you think, for one, do you think that'll work? And B, do you think the 2027 thing is a provocation year, either using Taiwan as that provocation? As you point out, the U.S. is trying to use that as a proxy.
Yeah, for sure, if there's going to be a provocation, Taiwan would be it. They tried to destabilize China through Tibet 70 years ago. They tried to destabilize China 20 years ago through Xinjiang. They've tried to destabilize China through Hong Kong. They've tried to destabilize China through Taiwan. So these are the four big destabilization things, pretty much. And I don't know if your audience are really aware of this, but the Tibetan thing and the Xinjiang thing have been totally debunked. I've been to Hong Kong, I don't know how many times since the 2019 protests. I'm going there again the day after tomorrow. I've got friends in Hong Kong. They are Hong Kong Chinese. And I've got friends who are foreigners living there. And I haven't yet met a person. I haven't personally met a person who wants Hong Kong to be independent ever, anywhere, not in mainland China. And there's a lot of Hong Kong people living here where I live because it's just a 90-minute ferry ride away. So it's very, very close. So those three things are kind of, they're on the back burner now and they're just bubbling away. And they're trying to build the Tibetan thing back up because there's a dam being built there. And this is a terrible thing. It's not a terrible thing, but that's another story for another day. Taiwan is the provocation. If they had been successful in this recall and the president, the governor of the province, had managed to gain control of the legislative yuan, then I think this would have been a much worse situation. Right now, China is probably going, thank God for that. It didn't go the way that America wanted it to go. And that has given a bit of a reprieve because now the world has seen Taiwan has a democratic process that worked. And they're happy with that. So the democratic process worked a year ago or November last year I think it was November, maybe January, I can't remember now, a few months ago in the elections, and it worked again in the recall. So it's all sorted now, and I think that's okay. So I don't think we have the same catalyst that we would have had before. Now, let's talk about how the Americans could do this. They've got 12 aircraft carriers, of which I think only 3 are in the water at any given time. UK has one, which is not really very functional, and it's not working. It's in Australia at the moment, and it's a good little prize. It's full of American F-35s, and I mean, I can't imagine American air pilots and American crews on a British Royal Navy ship and getting along quite well. I just think they'd have to keep their mess rooms separated, otherwise there'd be brawls every night.
Why do you say that?
Well, I know a lot of Royal Navy. In my day, I knew a lot of Royal Navy sailors. They don't take kindly to those Yankee types. If you spend a bit of time in places like Portsmouth, where there's a lot of Navy people there, you get to know the kind of people that they are. It would be fun to be on that ship as an observer for sure.
Okay.
Anyway, putting that aside, what are they going to do? They're going to blockade the ports. Which port are they going to blockade? So probably Hong Kong port is a very busy one. Shanghai port is a very busy one. There's a couple of other ports, Dalian port. There's probably 3 or 4 major, huge ports that they could blockade with the troops that they've got. They could blockade those ports. But there's 40 other ports that China could use that they couldn't blockade. So China would be able to run ships in and out. They just change directions. And they don't have enough ships for the South China Sea. Yes, there are choke points, and the Malacca Straits is one. There's a couple of other choke points that they say we can choke off China there. But the fact is, China has subdued the problems that America caused in Xinjiang, and now has train lines. There's 500 trains a year going in and out of China through Xinjiang and through Inner Mongolia. So you see a little bit of destabilizing attempts in Inner Mongolia as well, because these are places that China can get out without going to the sea. Now there's also the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is a link, and it's a road, but it's going to be a rail, which will go through Afghanistan eventually into the port of Gwadar, and that cuts off half of the journey. So they can take a train to the port of Gwadar. This is why Americans don't like China being in Pakistan, because the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is working very, very well. And that is in the state of Balochistan, which is the place that's got all of the problems, again, through American interference. And it happens to be the largest province of Pakistan, and it borders Iran. So America loves that place for causing problems. But the fact is, China has many different ways. It's got oil and gas coming in by pipeline from Russia and Mongolia. It's got coal coming in by trucks and trains from Mongolia. I just cycled through the coal areas in Shanxi. I mean, it's massive, massive. These trains go past and they have 60, 70-ton carriages, 60, 70-ton carriages. And then it's gone. And about 3 minutes later, you hear another one is coming past. These things are so regular. They're moving stuff around by train. I don't think it's going to be the success that the West would think that it would be. That's my view. A blockade would certainly hurt, but it wouldn't. You don't have enough ships. Even if they get all of their allies together, there wouldn't be enough ships to blockade. And China has something very special called the Carrier Killer, which is a hypersonic missile that can be fired from the back of a truck. They don't know where they are. I don't know where they are. China knows where they are, but the Americans don't know where they are because they can move them anytime they want. And these things can fire things 1,800 kilometers. They're sitting in the middle and the far west of China. They can fire something 1,800 kilometers, and they can hit the top of a drawing pin. That's how accurate they are. And they're hypersonic. There's no defense against them. They've also got tens of thousands of drones. America doesn't stand a chance. If it comes to China with a war, it's not going to have a chance. If China were to go out and take America on in the open seas, then for sure America would prevail, I'm sure. But I don't think they can win a war of attrition in China. The other thing is that Chinese people are very patriotic. If Americans land in China, they wouldn't get a very nice welcome. If an American comes and says, I'm here to rescue you from the dreaded CCP, they'd get shot in the head.
I'm here to rescue. Yeah, I'm America. I'm here to help you out. Last question. Do you think that they would be stupid enough to provoke a war in this way?
Trump is the peaceful president, isn't he?
That's what he says. Yeah. That's what he says. That's what his mouth says. That's what his mouth says.
His mouth may say that, but his administration don't. He's surrounded himself with war hawks. You've
Yes.
got people like Elbridge Colby in there. He's the guy who wrote the Strategy of Denial, and he wrote this a few years ago to show how to blockade China.
Exactly.
And basically, his theory would fail after 2027 because China would have all the necessary means. And I think that's why they've got this deadline in their minds. They've got to do this by 2027. And I think the bottom line is they'd be crazy to start, but that doesn't mean they wouldn't.
Exactly.
I would say no. America will not start a war. There would be too many body bags going home. There would be, and far too many people would end up in Davy Jones's locker.
Yeah.
Those carrier killers will just take out a carrier, bang. Now there's going to be, what's America going to do? It's going to retaliate with nuclear weapons. China has the defenses. You put a nuclear weapon up against China, China has signed the non-first strike treaty. China is the only country in the world that has nuclear weapons that has guaranteed it will not first strike anyone. Other countries have signed it with conditions. They won't first strike against a country that hasn't got nuclear weapons or something like that. China is the only country that has signed a treaty that says they will not first strike with a nuclear weapon. But the moment a submarine off the Chinese coast puts up a nuclear weapon, bang, China's going to say, okay, Washington, you're done, because they've got them on hypersonics. And that's something America doesn't have yet. Russia and China and Iran have hypersonics. So I don't think anybody in the American administration would be stupid enough to do that. So if they lost a carrier, they should really just pull back out and say, shit, we had no idea that was coming. And we're sorry. But I can't see any American ever doing that. They're going to say, oh, look what China did to us. We're going to hit them bigger, harder. Well, that would be a nuclear war. And
Yes.
that is what must be avoided at all costs. That mad, the mutually assured destruction. So I can't see any American being stupid enough to start something they know they can't finish, they know they can't win, and the only way to win it is total obliteration of the human race, basically.
Jerry, from your mouth to God's ears. Thank you for this. Great.
Okay.
You are always a great guest, man. Jerry
Yes.
Gray, he was born in the UK. He lived in Australia. He is now living in China, pushing back on much of the propaganda that is coming out of the West, trying to give, let's say, a legit, genuine take on what China is actually like in politics and everything else. Jerry, thank you for this, man. You have my deepest appreciation. Be safe.
Thank you very much indeed.
All right, bye-bye.